It's great to be back here at Our Lady Center. I'm trying to remember, it was 2010 or 11 that I was here, or 12?
I think it was probably 11.
Yeah, 11 sounds about right, because I know we had just had a protest of Kathleen Sebelius at a club in Chicago. NARAL, Pro-Choice America, had this fundraising event, and she came out to speak there, and I talked a little bit about that experience. I guess that's what I like to do when I'm casting about for topics to talk about. I fall back on storytelling. I guess maybe it's growing up. Many people don't know this about my father. They know he's a great pro-life activist. They know that he's been fighting hard for the lives of unborn children from the very beginning of their legal struggle since the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. But he's also a great storyteller. He especially likes to tell ghost stories. And often my little nieces and nephews and children are scared by his ghost stories. So he's learned to kind of tone down the scary part of them a little bit. So, you know, storytelling, I guess, is part of our family heritage, besides fighting abortion. Now, when I was coming out here a few days ago, Jack gave me a call and he said, "No, Eric, if there's some kind of silver bullet you could tell us about, something we haven't thought of before, something we can do that is going to shut down Leroy Carhart and these other abortion clinics around Maryland, you got to share that with us, because we want the easy answer we haven't found yet." And I know Jack's kind of kidding around, because he's been involved in this long enough to know there is no silver bullet, there is no easy answer. There's really only hard work, nose to the grindstone, day after day, day in and day out. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the way that God can use the work that we do. Our willingness to say yes to His call, our willingness to go out there and take action on behalf of our unborn brothers and sisters, and work miracles out of the things that we do. Out of our humble beginnings, God can really do amazing things. And so I want to tell a story about that. And I want to go back a few years to 2007 for a story that has always struck me as a really amazing example of how God uses what we make possible to do great things, to do miraculous things even, and how we can, you know, thank Him for that and count on Him to do these things and surprise us with the miracles that He'll be able to work. So let's go back to 2007. It's June 2007, and I'm in my backyard. I've taken some vacation time to build a playhouse for my kids. And it's a pretty cool playhouse. Very sturdy, cemented into the ground, 4x4s, and it's not one of those little flimsy ones you buy at the Walmart and then put together with an Allen wrench and a screwdriver and then shakes and shimmies. This is a rock solid giant play. I designed it and I built it myself, and I was very excited about the project. I was working on it with my sons, and I get this phone call from my dad. And "Don't you know I'm on vacation, Dad?" I answer the phone anyway. And he tells me, he says, is there an abortion clinic coming into Aurora, Illinois, where I live and where my office is? It's down the street from a high school. I don't know what's going on, but I just got a call. It turns out there was a contractor who was asked to work on a project, a building project in Aurora. Supposedly a medical center that was going to be a multi-tenant building, you know, like the typical medical center where there's a podiatrist and a pediatrician, maybe a dentist, you know, all sharing a building together and a lobby and so forth. But there was something about these plans that didn't look right to this man. He knew enough to see something was fishy. There are 2 surgery rooms. First of all, there's not multiple offices. There's one big thing. There's one room that's filled with phone lines, all kinds of computer and phone lines coming into it, like it's some sort of information center. Turns out it's a call center. That there's 2 surgery rooms. There are 13 recovery rooms in this building. What's going on? Why are they putting in bulletproof drywall? I didn't even know bulletproof drywall was a thing. Bulletproof glass, infrared sensors, cameras. What kind of a medical center is this? He got very suspicious, and he began to realize this is not a multi-use medical building. This is a giant abortion center. So he refused, of course, to work on the project, went and talked to his priest. He was very concerned about this. His conscience was troubled. What's my responsibility here? So the priest called a fellow named Peter Breen, who was at the time the director of a network of pregnancy centers. Peter also happens to be a lawyer, and so, you know, he became very involved in this battle using his legal skills. He ended up becoming a full-time pro-life lawyer for a pro-life law firm, and now he's actually going to be a state rep in Illinois. So all kinds of things came out of this whole story. There's all kinds of different branches we could follow. But we're going to follow this particular branch of some of the things we did actively out on the street to fight this place. So the contractor goes to the priest goes to the pregnancy center director, the pregnancy center director goes to Joe Scheidler, my father, and says, what do you guys think? Is there an abortion center coming to the suburbs of Chicago? So my dad calls me. So here's the trail of phone calls. So I get this call, and I decided to go out to the location where this construction was happening, out on the east side of town, jumped on my bike, took my camera, and went out there one evening to see what was happening. And I see all these bulldozers and contractor vehicles and the porta potties they have out in the yard, and they're still working on the landscaping, and it looks like there's maybe some painting going on, but the building's built. It doesn't have a front door yet, but it's about to be put in. It's just the final touches that they're working on at this construction site. And there's a sign there that says Gemini Office Development. So we started looking into who is Gemini Office Development. We started asking questions of the City Hall. Is this an abortion clinic coming into town? Now this was particularly of urgent concern to us in the city of Aurora, because only 6 months before, a notorious abortion clinic had just shut down. A clinic that was owned by a guy named Alexander Jakubowski. Alexander Jakubowski he's an old man now, and he was a notorious abortionist out in the west suburbs of Chicago. He had retired some years before and was actually renting his abortion clinic to another abortionist. This other abortionist was having a hard time making a living because we had sidewalk counselors out there offering help to his clients and saving babies week after week after week. Now, of course, a lot of women ignored them and went through with their abortions anyway, but it was hard for him to make enough money to pay his rent. And he eventually got evicted by the abortionist who owned the building. The abortionist who was working there was evicted, and the abortion clinic shut down. And then the building was sold. So we thought, this is it. We've gotten rid of abortion in our town. We started to hear rumors that the place might be reopening, and it actually had a community meeting. A couple hundred people came out to this community meeting to talk about whether this abortion center was going to reopen or not. So the community was mobilized. Turns out that what was actually happening was that Planned Parenthood had created a front company, Gemini Office Development, and was moving into town. The way we found that out was by bugging City Hall and by writing letters to the editor of the Aurora Beacon News, kind of a liberal paper. We sometimes call it the Aurora Beacon Fused. The Aurora Beacon News. And it was the Aurora Beacon that contacted Planned Parenthood and broke the story. And then the next day, an even longer story was published in the Chicago Tribune about how Planned Parenthood had bought this location years ago, how they created 2 different companies, one to buy the land and then one to develop this building. Gemini Office Development, initials G-O-D, that's kind of ironic, isn't it? That's their brazenness. Gemini, the two-faced, the zodiacal sign of Gemini, the two-faced. Kind of ironic, isn't it? So they created this front company. They applied for permission to build. They applied for permission to put up a sign. One of the permits in particular was for a sign. They wanted to have a sign out in front, of course. Every building needs to have a sign. And they said, well, we don't know what the text is going to be yet. The text was going to be Planned Parenthood. They knew, because Gemini Office Development was a wholly owned subsidiary, that Planned Parenthood was moving in. We found the documents that said, where they said to the city council, we don't know who's going to occupy this building, but we want to move forward anyway. They brazenly lied to the Planning and Development Committee of the City of Aurora. They lied to the City of Aurora. They lied to the state. They told the state that they were going to be a not-for-profit health service serving poor women. They told the City of Aurora they were going to be a multi-use medical facility paying taxes into the coffers of the city and the county. So we found out about this, thanks to the press that we goaded on to do the research. And we also learned that Planned Parenthood was planning to open on September 20th, 2007. I did the math and I realized that if we started the next week with a prayer vigil, we could do 40 days of prayer outside of Planned Parenthood. This was right about the time that 40 Days for Life was getting started. In fact, the very first nationwide 40 Days for Life campaigns were set to begin later that fall. So I got on the phone with David B. Wright, who's the head of 40 Days for Life, and said, David, do you think we could pull off a 40-day vigil with 3 days to plan? And he said, Eric, I don't know if anyone can do it, but I know you can do it. He's a real booster. He probably would have said that to anybody. But I gave me a lot of confidence. I said, David, should we do a 12-hour vigil or should we do a 24-hour vigil? I don't know if we can get people. He says, you know what? people get more excited about a 24-hour vigil. They don't want to see the chain of prayer broken. So do a 24-hour vigil. All right, so this was on a Friday. I sent out an email to about 120 activists in the area, people who had come to that planning meeting when we thought the other abortion clinic was going to reopen, and invited them to come out to a meeting in the basement of my church, St. George Church in Aurora, that next Monday. All right, so we planned this meeting, just a few days to plan the meeting, and invited people to come to this meeting. The day of the meeting, it's raining cats and dogs. And I'm thinking, nobody's coming to this meeting. It's going to be me, my parents, our lawyer, sitting around, twiddling our thumbs and wondering what to do next, because nobody showed up. In fact, 80 people streamed into the basement of this church, all of us soaking wet. It was just like a sauna down there, steaming. I had one of those big giant notepads for us to take notes on, a big marker, and I couldn't take any notes because the paper was turning back into pulp as I wrote on it. It just was, getting all wet, and so it was really kind of stuffy down there, but everyone was so excited, and I immediately got volunteers for about half of those 40 days to be responsible for signing up prayer volunteers to come out and pray 24 hours a day. Within just a few weeks, we had filled up all 40 of, in fact, just a few days, we had filled up all 40 of the days with leaders for that day, day captains we call them, who were going to call up every friend they could find and post things at their church and get people to come out and pray at Planned Parenthood, because we didn't know what else to do. The building's almost finished. It seems like they're just going to be able to open their doors. Let's go out and pray. So we started this prayer vigil, and immediately we started having trouble with the police. They'd never seen anything like this, people coming out and praying in the middle of the night. One police officer would say, you can't stand on the sidewalk, you have to stand on the grass. Another police officer would come and say, you can't stand on the grass, you have to stand on the sidewalk. Police officers would say, you guys should really have some water out here. Or someone brings out a water cooler. There was a woman who lived nearby who was replenishing the water cooler every day. Then another police officer comes and says, you can't have that cooler. Here, get that out of here, or we're going to arrest you. We had the police telling a woman in a wheelchair, you have to keep moving. When you're picketing, you have to keep moving. You have to be moving in a circle. They always tell us that. And it's not true. It's absolutely not true. You can't require disabled people to move in order to express their First Amendment rights. So, a lot of trouble with the police. We didn't have any trouble with the media because they were completely ignoring us. Except for the Aurora Beacon, the local paper, which is desperate to get stories. They came out and they covered, there's this prayer vigil going on. But the media was ignoring what was happening. Even as the protest started to grow. We had a protest in the middle of August, towards the end of August that year. We originally were just going to have a little mild Face the Truth tour that day, and we decided to shift it to the weekend and invite everybody to come out. We had over 1,000 people come out for a protest. The Spanish language TV came out, and the Aurora Be Confused came out, but the television stations ignored it. It was one of the biggest protests ever held outside an abortion clinic in the country, certainly in the past decade. So it was a very big event, but they completely ignored it. Why? Because there had been a rainstorm the day before, and there was some flooding to take pictures of instead. Because that's exciting, flooding never happens. So they covered that instead. So the media was ignoring us. We were starting to go to city council meetings and complain. Enough people came to the city council that we kept them up until 1 o'clock in the morning one day. And they finally passed a resolution that they were going to investigate whether Planned Parenthood had done anything fraudulent over the course of their permitting and applications process. And we had found these documents where they lied about who they were, in these city council minutes where they lied to the planning committee. So they started to launch this investigation. Still not much media coverage. So one day, I got a call from a reporter, and I was kind of surprised. It was the ABC TV affiliate. Why are they calling me? They've been ignoring us all along. And she asked if I could meet her out at Planned Parenthood, because she wanted to do an interview. So this is good. We're finally starting to get a little bit of coverage. They're finally starting to realize something's happening out here. So I went out to Planned Parenthood and met with this reporter, and she said, what did you think about, do you have any comment about Planned Parenthood's press conference today? I said, remind me, which of their press conferences was that? Acting as if I knew what she was talking about. Planned Parenthood had just held a press conference in downtown Chicago, not in Aurora, 30 miles away, with about 4 or 5 pro-choice ministers. They had the Reformed Jewish minister, and they had the United Church of Christ, and a couple others there, pro-choice ministers, praying that God would allow Planned Parenthood to open so that women would get the health care they need out in the suburbs. They're trying to achieve the moral high ground, because We've been going to the city council, grandmas and teachers and moms. We had a doctor who talked about post-abortion complications she's seen on the emergency room table, you know, the bleeding out. We had counselors talking about how bad abortion is for girls. We had, you know, priests talking about how bad abortion is for the community and so forth. They wanted to counteract that by having this press conference about how their abortion center was going to open with God's help. Now, it just happened that we were about to publish a full-page ad in the Aurora Beacon News with 140 clergy, Protestant and Catholic, speaking out against Planned Parenthood. And not from Chicago, 30 miles away, but from our own community, the Fox Valley community of Illinois. So we had our own ministers speaking out against abortion, and that ad was about to be published in the paper. Also going on this particular week was something called the Jericho March. I've been out there one day, because I was out there all the time talking to the volunteers and making sure they have what they need, giving them prayer books and bringing water and, you know, being out there in prayer myself. And so I was getting to know everybody out there in the local community. I hadn't been living in Aurora for very long at that point. And there was one fellow named Little John. He always called himself Little John. And he was a little guy. He was a short fella, John Thorne, very holy guy. He always wore a pro-life cap. And he used to brag to me that his short stature was a gift. And he was using it for the pro-life cause because people always had to look down when they talked to him. And so he had all these pro-life buttons on his cap. He thought, you know, they have to look down at me, they're going to see a bunch of pro-life buttons and precious feet and vote pro-life and all these things on his cap. Well, John had this idea that what we should do is have a Jericho march. We should march around this building just like the armies of Joshua did in the Bible. Maybe God will, you know, cause a sinkhole to open up or lightning to strike it or something like that. So let's do that. And I thought, that's a crazy idea. We're already struggling to man 24 hours of prayer for 40 days. I'm begging all these prayer captains, day captains, to fill up their hours. And we still got 1 or 2 days without captains. We're struggling to find somebody who will take on that task and come out and pray. And trying to get people involved, the Knights of Columbus, the different churches. You know, we can't also have a week. His idea was to do this for a week. 7 days, just like Joshua. That's crazy. What a horrible idea. But he was so earnest. He was such a good guy. And he said, Eric, you're the captain. You're in charge. I wasn't in charge. I just sent out some emails and I was willing to pretend I was in charge. Well, he says, you're the captain. You know, you decide. If you don't think it's a good idea, we won't do it. But I just wanted to, you know, to throw that out there to you. And I couldn't say no to the guy. So I said, all right, John. I'm going to let you be in charge of that. See if you can get people to come out. I'll send out a couple emails for you. So that Sunday, we had the first day of the Jericho March. And I thought, well, we'll be lucky if we get a dozen people. You know, it's hard enough to get the people who came out to pray that hour. We had 200 people come out for this Jericho March, including a big contingent from one of the Spanish language parishes in the community. So we had the rosary in Spanish going on, and we had a Protestant group, you know, chanting some hymns. And we couldn't march around the building because it was private property. What we did was we walked around the block that the building was on, which is about a quarter mile. So it was a nice long march, you know. Did this Jericho March together, came to the end. Next day, 300 people showed up. The crowds kept growing day after day after day. Not one single day was there less than 200 people coming out for this Jericho March. And John had built this banner with a big red cross on it, you know, like the Crusaders or something. Jericho March for Life, and walked around the block. And so I started to get excited about this and see some real potential. So we decided what we should do is we should hold a big finale. For the final day of the Jericho March, we'll have people come out and we'll walk around this building, this block, 7 times, just like in the book of Joshua. So we're going to go out there and march around this building 7 times and see what God can do. You know, we're going to make the symbolic protest of this building in a special way. So when this reporter asked me, you know, about this press conference that Planned Parenthood had just held with the pro-abortion ministers, I said, well, we're having a press conference of our own, which we weren't until that second. I kind of made it up on the spot. Yeah, we're going to have a press conference. I figured with 140 clergy signing a statement, I've got to be able to find a few of them who will come to a press conference on Saturday morning when we're doing this big Jericho March. But perfect timing. So I kind of made up the idea that we're going to do this on the spot. I said, yeah, we're going to be doing a press conference on Saturday with a bunch of clergy. Hundreds of clergy have signed this, over 100 clergy have signed this petition and this ad that's going to go in the paper. And So we're going to do that too. Well, now they had to come because she'd asked me about it. You know, the media, yes, the media is biased against us. The media is largely pro-abortion. But their even bigger bias is that they love a good story. A Planned Parenthood press conference in Chicago, followed by a pro-life press conference with even more clergy in the actual community where things are happening, that's an interesting story, even if they don't like what we're doing with pro-life. And so they came out to cover it. And she said, we'll be there. So at least one TV station was going to show up for the Jericho March. That's great. The next day, I'm in my office planning for the Jericho March. And I like to plan things carefully. And I use Photoshop to draw maps of the area where we're going to be working. I had volunteers lined up to man all the intersections. They're going to have pro-life sashes. Everyone's got a radio. We've got people in charge of this part of it and that part of it. And I'm working on my map with all my colors and my dotted lines and where we're going to march and who's going to be where and who's going to be arriving first and who's going to be staying afterwards to make sure things get cleaned up and all that. When I get a call from my attorney, Tom Brecka, Thomas More Society, says, Eric, you got to get downtown right now. Tom, I can't move. I'm working on the plans for this Jericho March. I can't go anywhere. You got to come down here. The city's trying to stop you. We're in federal court. Okay. So I jump in my car. I don't have time to put on a suit or anything like I would normally do if I'm going to a court. So I go downtown, jump out of my car. One of the workers for the Thomas More Society, a guy named Tim Murphy, one of the stalwart pro-life activists of the ages, grabs my car and goes and parks it somewhere. Hopefully he's not going to lose it. I go up the elevator to this federal court. There's this judge, Virginia Kendall. There's the attorney for the city of Aurora and some of the outside counsel that they bring in. There's my attorneys. And they're all arguing about the Jericho March. The city has decided they don't want us to be able to hold this Jericho March. They say it's going to be too disruptive. They also say it's against the law. You can't picket in a residential neighborhood, they say. They have a law against that. And a lot of municipalities do. Laws against residential picketing. And we've faced this before because sometimes we go to the homes of abortionists and picket there. Supreme Court has actually upheld that type of a picket. You have to keep moving. You're not allowed to stand right in front of someone's property the whole time. But you're allowed to be in the neighborhood and let the neighbors know about what's happening, you know. So they're trying to stop us using this law. And they say to the judge, you know, this is going to be disruptive, it's going to be unsafe. And I say, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have these. They didn't like that I was calling the groups of people who are going to march battalions. They thought that was too militaristic or something. It's just a name. It comes out of the Bible, you know. We're armies like Joshua, but we're just praying. We're just singing. We're holding rosary beads. And the judge finally says to them, look, you're asking me to give you permission to enforce your own law. Just enforce it. If you want to stop this march from happening, you've got the law to do it. You don't need my help. I'm not going to give you this injunction. So our attorneys turned around and said, well, Judge, this is First Amendment protected speech. Here's the Supreme Court case. Here's this and that. You should stop the city from any enforcement action against this march. And to that, the judge said, no, I'm not going to do that either. You haven't given me the proper briefs, because they just kind of come up with this idea at the last moment. I'm not going to do that either. You guys go to the conference room across the hall and work something out. So that's what we did. We went across the hall of the courtroom to the conference room to talk about what we were going to do. And I'm just sitting there, you know, itching for a fight. I can't wait for them to come out with paddy wagons and start arresting grandmothers with their rosary beads and soccer moms with their strollers and the community of Aurora. I mean, this is regular people. This isn't the profile that you see in the media of the crazy pro-life activists. You know, this was just the whole community rising up against this abortion center in our midst. Nothing would have been better than for the police to try and start arresting everybody. So what we decided in the end, they agreed to let us hold our Jericho March, walking around the block, but we can only go around the block once. I wasn't happy about that because that wasn't the biblical story we were trying to retell. What we did instead was we created 7 battalions, each of which would go around the block once, and we had a few people, don't tell the city attorneys about this, but we had a few people who would run from one group to the other. So we actually had a core group that was going around 7 times without anybody really knowing about it.
Very good.
So we were able to sneak in the story anyway. So we get done with this negotiation and decide that this is what we're going to do. We're going to be allowed to do our walk around the block one time. We get downstairs to the lobby of the federal court, and what do we behold but a wall of TV cameras. And one of those clusters of microphones that you see, you know, as if we had just come back from the moon landing and we're going to tell about what that was like. You know, they were so excited to see us because the city had created a story. They had created an interesting story. The city of Aurora is trying to stop this pro-life march from happening. The pro-lifers are fighting in court. That's an interesting story. So all the press of Chicago, the TV, the radio, the newspapers, all came out to cover this. Better yet, the city attorney for Aurora says, we are gratified that the court has seen the value of our petition and kept this march to reasonable limits, and that's all I'm going to say. I will not take questions. And she marches off. And I come up to the camera, and I'm willing to talk about it. Well, this is a great victory for free speech. The city tried to shut us down, and they weren't able to. We're going to be out there marching tomorrow for life and protesting Planned Parenthood. They're unwelcome our committee. The community. They lied to us. Those lies are going to be exposed, and we're going to shut them down. So I was able to get the media all excited because I was willing to talk to them, unlike the city attorney. So the next morning dawns. All of the media are there. Not just the Spanish language station, not just the Aurora Be Confused. Channel 7, Channel 5, Channel 9, Channel 32, Univision, and Telemundo is there, and all the newspapers, WBBM Radio, they're all there. WGN is there to cover this event. What's more, the press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock, this press conference I made up on the fly, and that we quickly managed to find a few pastors willing to come to talk at. I figured, again, out of 140, we're sure to find a few. So we got some great pastors to come, and we took our full-page ad that was going to be published in the paper that we were paying for, and we blew that up into a big, huge poster that they stood behind as they were going to give their talks. Now, as the press conference was about to start at 10 o'clock, everyone was finishing their march around the block. Now, if we had been allowed to do what we wanted to, these marchers would have been still marching. They'd have been marching and marching and marching around the block while the press conference was taking place, and there would have been only a few people around for the press conference. Instead, everyone was stopped because they'd had their one time around the block. So instead of just a few dozen people standing around this vacant lot across from Planned Parenthood, we had 1,000 people standing there across the vacant lot from Planned Parenthood. And it looked like exactly what it was. This massive community outreach. We had Planned Parenthood, Bad for Aurora, lawn signs that we were able to show everybody. Now, I hadn't even thought about lawn signs. It was Planned Parenthood, as they started to realize they were losing ground, that had decided to do yard signs. So they printed these yard signs. This family supports Planned Parenthood with pink signs. And they had volunteers going around, or paid people really, going around and putting them in people's yards. I knew of one case where a woman with Alzheimer's had a sign in her yard because they told her that, you know, they lied to her about what they were doing. People were putting these signs in their yard because Planned Parenthood said, oh, we're here to help women in need, needy women with health care. They lied about who they were, as they always do. And so a lot of these people threw their Planned Parenthood signs out and put our Planned Parenthood Bad for Aurora signs in, because when they started to do yard signs, we realized we have to do yard signs. So I found a company that prints political signs and got them to give us a good price, and we had pretty soon 5,000 yard signs spread out throughout the community. Everywhere you went were these yellow signs, Planned Parenthood, bad for Aurora, bad for Fox Valley. The whole community was filled with these things, an idea I would have never had if Planned Parenthood hadn't thought of it first. So there we were with these signs and these Stop Abortion Now signs and this massive community. So that as the cameras are shooting, these pastors talking about the value of life and how our community opposes Planned Parenthood, there's 1,000 people behind them with signs testifying to this community effort to stop Planned Parenthood. I could never have planned that. I could never have arranged for that. But thanks to Planned Parenthood, thanks to the city of Aurora trying to stop this thing and that becoming a story, suddenly we had this massive coverage. Then the next day, when our full-page ad is appearing in the paper, we actually had 2 full-page ads, one with the ministers all speaking out against abortion, and another with facts about Planned Parenthood, how they lie to the communities, how they steal money from the government and lie in Medicare, how they drive a wedge between parents and their children, the horrible sex education programs they have, how big of a huge role they play in aborting babies, #1 abortion provider, all these facts about Planned Parenthood. These 2 ads now are in the paper, and on the front page is this big picture of this massive protest going on. So that You know how it is when you're reading the paper, you flip through the ads, whatever. So now, when people flipped through the paper and saw that ad, it was an ad about the thing they'd just seen on the front cover. You can't pay for that kind of coverage. There's not enough money in the world to get that kind of coverage. We earned that media. We earned it thanks to Planned Parenthood, thanks to the media, thanks to the city of Aurora. So what could have been a boring press conference with no one showing up to cover it, in fact, there wouldn't have even been a press conference if it weren't for Planned Parenthood. All these things came together because of things that our enemies were trying to do. We had three different forces lined up against us. Planned Parenthood, trying to give moral cover to their diabolical business by having these pro-choice ministers come and talk about how God wants this abortion clinic to open. We had the city of Aurora trying to stop us from marching and praying through this community, misusing their laws because they didn't want to deal with the hassle of it. We had the mainstream media who had been ignoring us all this time and kind of backed themselves into a corner where they couldn't ignore us anymore because now Planned Parenthood was talking, we were talking and telling an even more interesting story than Planned Parenthood is. All these streams came together, and God used all of that to create this massive movement. A couple days later, the city found themselves in federal court with Planned Parenthood because this investigation that they were conducting was going to take longer than originally planned. One of the investigators, it turned out, had close ties to the city attorneys, and that was a conflict of interest. And then the next guy had some kind of connection somewhere else that was inappropriate. They kept proposing, someone who's going to do this research and do this investigation who wasn't really an appropriate person to do it. And so it was taking longer than they expected. And because of all this media coverage, because everybody now was watching what the city of Aurora was doing, they couldn't just paper it over and let Planned Parenthood open. They were supposed to open just a few days later. So they went into federal court, Planned Parenthood versus the city of Aurora. Now two of our enemies are fighting each other. And the city of Aurora had to fight for the right to continue this investigation. So the day that Planned Parenthood was supposed to open, their doors were closed. Now Planned Parenthood did eventually open. They opened weeks later than they intended to. And because of the disruption that all of this caused, they weren't able to bring the abortionists in for weeks more. So we were able to stop them from doing abortions there for 4, 6, maybe 8 weeks, more than they would have. And there may have been some lives saved because of that. You know, the decision to go through with an abortion is one that women are very, very conflicted about. You know, and the smallest thing will stop them from going through with it. You know, just seeing somebody praying outside the clinic, sometimes they'll stop. It costing just a little bit more than they thought, they won't go through with it. The place not being open when they thought it would be, they won't go through with it. So we hope that maybe some children were saved because of those weeks of Planned Parenthood not being able to get their operation up and running. But what I know for sure happened was that more and more people started coming out for those final days of our prayer vigil. And we continued the prayer vigil. We kept it going. It became a 56-day prayer vigil, 24 hours a day until the day that Planned Parenthood opened. People who had never gotten involved in pro-life before, but who were with us on the issue, came out. They came out for that Jericho March. They came out to that federal court. They came out for those final days of the prayer vigil as we carried it on. And they also came out on the day that Planned Parenthood finally opened to pray and to weep that this abortion clinic was finally opened in our community. And from that came one of the strongest local pro-life communities in the country. In the 7 years that Planned Parenthood has been open, we've continued to hold monthly protests there. We've continued to pray during the hours that they're open. We've continued to sidewalk counsel. There's not even a real sidewalk there. It's very hard to reach the women, but we've continued to reach out to them. We've saved 60, maybe 70 babies over the course of that time that we know about. And we have hung together. People who have had been pro-life their whole lives but never did anything, came out and did something, got involved. And I credit Planned Parenthood, the city of Aurora, and the pro-choice media for helping make that possible. They brought so much attention to the issue that we were able to build up a great community. And not only that, we realized that when Planned Parenthood comes to town, this should be one of our goals. And I always tell pro-life leaders when they call me and say, we think Planned Parenthood's coming, or we know they're building a building, or they're just about to move to a larger space. Use this. It's going to be very hard to stop them. You got to try. You probably won't. You should know. You probably won't succeed at stopping them from opening. But what you can succeed at is building up the faith community of pro-lifers who will take action against this. Because, my friends, the victory is won. We cannot lose when we work for God. We cannot lose when we say yes. Even when Planned Parenthood opens, the fact that we're there saying no and praying about it is a victory for Christ. So we got a whole new perspective about how to fight Planned Parenthood from this. Use the controversy to build up the pro-life community. I want to close with a story from fairly recently on the front lines of the fight against abortion. One of these women, one of these people that I got to know as good friends of mine in the pro-life community of Aurora, a woman named Linda, somebody who'd always been against abortion, had never done anything active about it, who started to come out and to pray at Planned Parenthood, was approached by a young man. Came up to her and said, "I want you to know that you don't go unnoticed." And he told her this story. He said, I've been driving past this place for years. It doesn't look like an abortion clinic. I wouldn't have thought it was, but I noticed people were playing. I heard about it in the news. And I saw you guys out here in the summer, the heat, in the rain, in the snow. And it gets cold in Chicago in the wintertime. We had a horribly bitter winter, 20 degrees below zero. You guys are out there. And when my girlfriend got pregnant, a while back, I thought about that. She wanted to have an abortion. This wasn't the right time to have a child. But I thought, you know what? If those people are willing to stand out in all weathers and pray for my child that they don't even know, I should be willing to fight for my child's life. He said, I did that. I said, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll marry you. I'll help raise this child. We can't go through with this abortion. This child has value. We've got to have this child. And his baby son had just been born a few days before. And he wanted to come out and tell someone about it. He was so happy about what had happened, about the transformation in his heart, that he came up to Linda and told her, don't ever think that you go unnoticed. Keep coming out here to pray. Now think about that. Here was a life saved, not because a sidewalk counselor said the right thing, not because a pregnancy center placed an ad in the yellow pages and got somebody to come out, not because there was a big protest that they had to drive through, but just humble people standing on a vacant lot praying week after week. Now we don't know how many different individuals that guy had seen. It may have been 100 different people at different times. It may have been the same person over and over again. I don't know who it was that he saw, but he saw somebody. If those people hadn't have been there, there'd be a dead baby and a broken heart and a man without a son. But because there was somebody there that day, and the other day, and the other day that he drove by, a life was saved. So in both of those stories, the dramatic story of the Jericho March and all that happened from that, and in this very simple story of one life that was saved, what's the common denominator? What's the takeaway? It's that when we go out and do something, even stepping out skeptically, like I was about the Jericho March, John, that's not going to work, but let's do it anyway. When we go and do something, God can make a miracle out of it. God can do more than we could ever imagine in our wildest dreams. I could have never dreamed about this massive press conference and breaking through that wall of media silence. I couldn't have thought of how to do that. I couldn't come up with it. But what I did come up with was saying yes to this little holy guy who wanted to have a Jericho March. And I said yes to inviting people to come out to pray. And they said, yes, we'll come out and pray. We'll come out and be there. We'll keep people out there praying when Planned Parenthood's open. Going and doing something. And God took it from there. He made a miracle out of it. So that's what I want to say to you. I want to encourage you that what you do out there matters. What you do is always a victory. You know what? If that man's girlfriend had decided to have the abortion, that would have been a horrible tragedy. But a worse tragedy would have been for her to decide to have an abortion, go to the abortion clinic, walk through the door, have the abortion, and leave without anyone being there to pray for her baby. That's the real tragedy. That's the real loss. That's the defeat. When a baby dies and no one's there to mourn, that's the tragedy. You know, we're out there trying to help. Sidewalk counselors want to offer help to the women. We want them to say yes to life. And it feels like a defeat when they ignore you and they go through with the abortion. It feels like an even worse defeat when they take the literature and they think about it and they come outside and have a cigarette and anguish over it and then go back in anyway. Come back out. And it's terribly sad. You know, it puts the whole tragedy into focus when you think this particular woman just went through with an abortion. It still surprises me to this day that people do that. They go through with it. Seeing the anguish so many people have suffered over abortion, I still am astonished that people actually walk through those doors. But they do. But God forbid they go through those doors without someone there to pray. You know, our Lord promised us. He said, "Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted." When we're out there and we pray for those babies as they're dying, we give them the only act of love they will ever have this side of eternity. So even at the hardest times, when the abortion takes place, the fact that we're there is a victory. There's nothing but victory. And all we have to do is say yes to God.